Hey, welcome to the briefing room. I'm Devin Dwyer at ABC News in Washington. Thank you so much for being with us here. 5 days out from the big midterm elections. We're great to have Mary Alice Parks, Deputy Political Director, here with us. Rick Klein's joining us from New York as well, the trusty political director who is up to his eyeballs in tracking races right now. Much more on those races to come. Of course, the president making some news. But let's start with the voting. Already underway right now, 33 states. Millions of ballots have been cast, and Mary Alice, we're seeing numbers we haven't seen in decades. Record-setting levels of people are already turning out across the country.
It looks like across the country the numbers are going to way surpass the last midterm elections, though we have to say those last midterm elections were very, very low voter participation. But what's remarkable is we're already seeing some states where the voting is surpassing presidential years.
Yeah,
that is just unbelievable. Democrats say that they really like what they're seeing, big uptick in young voters, especially in Texas and Georgia.
500% I saw, 18 to 29-year-olds overall, a 500% uptick from 2014, the last midterm. That's an incredible number.
And that's good for Democrats. We know that young people tend to tilt Democrat, but obviously we don't know all these voters, who they're voting for. We just know there's an unbelievable amount of interest.
So if you haven't voted yet, go to vote.org, check to see where your voting place is, when you can vote, if you can vote early. Get out there. Of course, next Tuesday, the polls will be open as well. As we are tracking here at ABC News, the early voting that is underway, we're also following a number of voting problems, voting concerns around the country. You've heard us here report in the briefing room and on the big vote, the trouble in Georgia, where there is a controversy over 53,000 registrations that have been put in limbo there. But there's also a fight that's been brewing in North Dakota, of all places, over a last-minute change to the law there in North Dakota since the primaries, requiring voter IDs, Mary Alice, to have a street address on the ID, not simply a P.O. box, and that impacts a heck of a lot of people.
And one group in particular. Democrats say this law was designed to specifically make it harder for Native Americans to vote. A huge Native American population there in North Dakota, much larger than the rest of the country, and a lot of them don't have street addresses. They have P.O. boxes just because of the way that the federal mail is delivered on reservations. And so they are really worried that this was a targeted effort and that it could swing the race. Last go around, Heidi Heitkamp, the sitting Democrat, only won by a few thousand votes, so this could make all the difference.
And that has spawned an incredible movement to push back against this new law. We've seen ID printing machines cropping up across the state, and an outpouring of support from outside North Dakota to come in and help mobilize Native American voters to make sure they can exercise those rights. And we're very pleased to have with us two of those leaders of that movement. Musical artist Ray Cyrus is joining us from Los Angeles. Great to have you here, sir. Also, actor Mark Ruffalo is with us from New York. Both of them have spent an extended amount of time in North Dakota these past few weeks. Mark, want to start with you. I know you've been out there, just back from there. Give us the backstory. How did you end up getting onto this issue and finding sort of a connection to North Dakota and those Native Americans?
Well, I had the honor of joining them during the Standing Rock water protecting events that were happening there. I made a lot of friends there, and I was invited back by my friends in Standing Rock and other tribes in North Dakota to come and help get a little spotlight on this, some national recognition, and lend a hand in making people feel seen and heard and cared about, and that's when me and Billy met up that way.
And we know the reaction. Our team on the ground out there in North Dakota saw the reaction. They know that people so warmly felt your presence and appreciated. And in fact, Billy Ray, you picked up on this, as I understand it. You've seen a tweet from our political director, Rick Klein. You tweeted him back, and Rick, I know, is joining us as well. Rick, that I know surprised you. Billy Ray tweeted at you.
Yeah, Billy Ray, I got to ask you. I mean, we'd never been in contact before, but what was it that caught your eye about our reporting out of North Dakota? I know you've been active with Native American issues in the past, but what was it about this issue that made you think, you know what, I've got to do something. I've got to head to the reservations and get some work done on the subject?
Well, I am very familiar with the indigenous people's plight, what they've been through in past, present, and what they're looking at for the future. And when I saw your story, it just really struck a nerve and said, this isn't right. Unfortunately, the law's been passed. The clock is ticking. There's no sense arguing about it. What we've got to do now is take action and find a solution to get people registered, to get their address, to get their voting cards. We got to take action and provide a solution. There's no sense arguing about it. It's done.
And Mark Ruffalo, it sounds like, from what we've heard, you've had pretty good success. I think we saw 2,000 new voters have been registered, Native American voters, because of your efforts.
Yeah, it's people are really jazzed and want to be heard and want their votes to count. I think what we saw out of Standing Rock was a swell of Native pride, and they want to continue their part in this democracy where they've been left behind so many times.
And we know you've been involved in Democratic politics, progressive politics for a long time. You were out there on the campaign trail in 2016. How does what you're seeing today on the ground, enthusiasm and interest, compare to what you've seen before?
You know, listen, we're in a rarefied time, and I'm seeing more and more people actually becoming awakened to what politics mean in their lives. And I'm seeing more and more people reaching outside their comfort zones to hear other people and their concerns and have compassion for them and inform themselves. And that's good for democracy, no matter how you cut it or how this election goes. I've just seen this blossoming of the social discourse and the political space with a lot of newcomers, a lot of new energy, a lot of new thinkers, and a much more diverse group of people engaging. And there's a silver lining to every dark cloud. And that is the silver lining of these really dark times we're living in. People are becoming more aware of their responsibility to themselves and their own communities.
And Billy Ray, in a number of conservative corners of the country, we often see politicians and their backers demonize Hollywood, that there's sort of a backlash against celebrities such as yourself and Mark participating, intervening in other states. Have you felt that in North Dakota, which traditionally has been a pretty Republican state? And what do you say to those critics of your effort?
Well, first, it's ironic. I got a big Hollywood sign here over my shoulder. And, you know, that being said, what I saw in North Dakota was a beautiful harnessing of power, integrity, brilliance, their spirit. Again, kind of as Mark said there, you could tell, okay, it's time that we take action. We take the ball. Keeping democracy alive. It's the one thing that every side agrees on. Democrat, Republican, Independent, everyone agrees. Democracy is somewhat under assault. Isn't it a beautiful irony that the Native Americans, the indigenous people, would help save our democracy? That's powerful. And like Mark said, there's young people. Where we were at was a college in Turtle Mountain. And it was young people. They were excited about democracy. And I think this is a great time for our country. It is a rejuvenation of the democracy, the spirit and the will of the people that built this country.
Yeah, that engagement certainly is uplifting. It's a positive, rejuvenating force for sure. And you talk about democracy. Want to play a little bit? You have a new single out, came out this summer, but it certainly perked up our ears. Let's play a little bit of it. It's called "Goddess of Democracy," and then we'd love to ask you about it. Take a listen.
She danced with flair across the square outside the palace gate.
A great vibe, a great tune, got us a democracy. What's the backstory to this, Billy Ray?
Well, I wrote the song with two-tour Vietnam veteran Don Von Tress and another great songwriter named John Brannon. Now, that's not John Brennan. A lot of people ask me, said, I didn't know John Brennan was a songwriter. It's John Brannon. But the thought is, we wrote it a year ago, and I recorded it this summer. And the thought is, our democracy, we all have seen that it's been somewhat under assault, but yet this is the time period where we as Americans, we pick democracy up. People have lived and died for our democracy. That's our freedom, and it's worth fighting for. And that's what this song is about. You can knock democracy down, but you can't keep her down. She'll get back up, and it's up to the power of the people. And that's what the song's about.
All right, thank you, Billy Ray. Check it out. Mark, before we let you go, give us your roadmap for the next 5 days. Are you guys headed back to North Dakota? What's in store?
I'm heading up to New York State, upstate. People are out there getting their friends and family. It's all about grabbing your friends and family and getting them out to vote. That's where this thing really matters. That's where connections are made, and that's what brings people to the polls. We're just focusing on getting our friends and families, calling them up, texting them, and getting them to the polls to, as Billy says, exercise the mother of democracy.
All right, Mark Ruffalo, so great to have you with us. Billy Ray Cyrus, a real honor to have you both. Thanks so much for sharing your story, and really glad that we could cover you out in North Dakota. Thank you for your time. And Mary Alice, I'm struck by their engagement, the level of engagement in North Dakota. So many of these states that don't get a lot of attention in midterms and presidential years, for sure, now on the map on an issue that's so important.
We expect a number of races to be razor thin. North Dakota is just one of them. So every vote, every
in
vote
2012, the Senate race was decided 3,000 votes in 2012. So
could be just that
going to
close.
be close this year as well. Well, the president is out there trying to turn out his base in a lot of these states. He's been to North Dakota as well. He is now headed to Missouri later today to stump in the Senate race there. That's where our White House senior national correspondent, Terry Moran, is standing by. He joins us now by phone. Terry, give us the scene outside of the Columbia, Missouri rally site, and what are you hearing from Trump supporters there?
Well, you know the scene. It is always an event in Trump country when Trump comes. I remember covering it in 2016. You got 100 miles outside of a major metropolitan airport, and it was like hitting a wall, a cultural, political wall in the country. And here it is. This is at the Columbia Regional Airport. This is kind of the heart of Heartland country, if you will, in the middle of the state of Missouri. And they have been lining up since last night. I'm watching people stream in. This is a close Senate race that he is here to promote. Claire McCaskill and Josh Hawley. And this is a neck-and-neck race right now, and he is going to be back. So he's playing offense a little bit by trying to go after Claire McCaskill. But he's determined to get out here. And I got to tell you, if the question is level of enthusiasm, there was a time during this midterm campaign when people were wondering about the enthusiasm of Republican voters. That has ended. The more Donald Trump has been out on the stump, the more stoked Republicans are. He is clearly the dominant figure, not just in the party. He's a dominant political figure in this country and in the world. He's changed the rules of the game around the world, and it's a rock star event, as you know. And then he throws him the red meat, which that's what they're here for. So it's a classic Trump rally.
A lot of red meat tonight, for sure, Terry. There was a lot last night as well. Our colleague, as you know, Jonathan Karl, caught up with Trump at last night's rally in Fort Myers. The president was optimistic as well. He's been feeling the energy of those supporters. Here's what he had to say about his predictions for these midterms next week. Take a listen.
If the Democrats win, I remember you surprised a lot of people by striking a deal with Pelosi and Schumer a year ago on the budget. Can you work with them if the Democrats win the House?
Well, we'd certainly try. I'm looking to unify. I always like to unify. We will certainly try. They've had a very hard time because they haven't been winning, and we'll see what happens in 5 days from now. It'll be very exciting, and it's going to be a very close race. They don't talk about the blue wave anymore. It's going to be a very close race. I think the Senate, we're looking very good. We feel very good about the Senate. And frankly, I think we feel pretty good about the House, but a lot of people, so many races, it's hard for me to get to every one of them.
All right, a lot of people, so many races, hard to get to. Terry, sounds a little bit like the president could be conceding the House. Life's going to get a heck of a lot more difficult for him if he loses it, right?
Question about it. Democrats are desperate to retake the House. But you also heard him say that the blue wave has dissipated and that he's feeling a little better, as I think Republicans are feeling better about the House of Representatives than they were 10 days, 2 weeks ago. And as far as working with the Democrats, look, the Democratic base doesn't want to work with President Trump at all. They want him impeached, some of them. But the Democratic members understand that they have to get things done if they get power. They have to demonstrate that they can deliver. Now, where would that be working with President Trump? It actually might be interesting to see. There is overlap. On trade, we saw it when Democrats, many of them welcomed the renegotiation of NAFTA. China is an area where, the China of Xi Jinping is not the China of Hu Jintao. And I think that Democrats and Republicans, there's a bipartisan consensus that policy towards China needs to be tougher, and infrastructure. So there is room for deals to be made if the Democrats take the House of Representatives. Still a big if, in my judgment. But wouldn't that be something? Wouldn't that be nice? I'm not sure either party's base would want to see that, but there is a mutuality of interest in some of those areas.
All right, our senior national correspondent Terry Moran out in Columbia, Missouri, where the president is tonight. Terry, thank you so much. We will see if a kumbaya moment perhaps could come from these elections. We will see between the parties. It's not just the Republicans. It's not just President Trump who's out stumping. There's a lot of firepower going around on the Democratic side as well. Big names coming out, hitting the trail, knocking on doors. In fact, today in Atlanta, we saw Oprah, of all people, knocking on doors in the governor's race there for Stacey Abrams, who would be the first African-American governor of that state. And that's where our Chris Donato has been all day long today. He joins us live now from Atlanta. Chris, what has Oprah been up to, and how is she being received down there in Atlanta?
Devin, Oprah showed up. She walked out on stage at the last event, and the crowd went wild, on their feet, cheering. It took about a minute or so for them to sit down. She even told them to sit down. She said no one paid for her to be here. She did this all on her own because she supports Stacey Abrams. So the crowd loved everything Oprah had to say, and the candidate herself loved Oprah too. She said she couldn't believe she was sitting across from Oprah and couldn't believe Oprah called her the other day.
And let's listen to a little bit of what she did have to say a little bit earlier. Here's Oprah from the stump.
Hello, Georgia. I just want to say y'all been on my mind. Oh, yeah. Georgia, you've been on my mind, and here's why. I was just sitting at home in California, minding my own business. But I could not stop thinking about what's going on down here. You all are on the precipice, on the very precipice of a historical election. So I'm here today because Stacey Abrams cares about the things that matter.
And Chris, she was also asked at the end of that whether she was going to run in 2020. Remember those rumors, Mary Alice?
Yeah, there were a lot of those rumors. But I guess she shut them down pretty hard today, Chris, right?
Oh, yeah, she shut it down, saying, no, I want the press and all of you in the room to know I'm not running. I'm not doing this to test the waters. I'm here for Stacey Abrams. So, she's come out a couple times, but she really swung hard this time, knocking down any rumors to Oprah 2020.
She also took time to actually knock on doors, which is something that volunteers do in the final stretch.
We may have some video of that as well.
I mean, the video is pretty wild.
Pretty funny.
I don't know if we have
Instagram. I guess we don't have it
right now.
Knock on
doors in the rain, too, by the way.
In the rain. So in this video that she put on her Instagram. Oh, wait, here it is. The surprise factor. I mean, can you imagine if Oprah knocked on your door out of the blue?
There it is.
They loved it.
Woman won a sweepstakes.
Yeah, it looked like she might as well have a big giant check.
All right, Kristen
I
Otto.
love
Clearly,
Oprah's
they're excited.
caption, which is you never know who's going to knock on your door.
A bit of surprise there. All right, Kristen Otto in Atlanta for us. We know you've got to sit down because she's about to come out. Thank you so much, Chris, for that. Let's bring Rick Klein, political director, back into the conversation. Rick, the president said yesterday he has put himself on this ballot. He sees himself on the ballot. Democrats want him on the ballot as well. He could be cruising for a bruising if he gets rejected. There's a bit of political risk in that, is there not?
It is an unavoidable risk, and right now what we are seeing is just an entirely different map for the House and the Senate. It is very likely in terms of Republicans right now that the House is slipping away. We are seeing it in the polling, we're seeing it in the anecdotal data, the reporting that we're showing is just they don't see a way to get traction in these Republican districts where President Trump is hurting them. Meanwhile, in the Senate, we are seeing almost the exact opposite. We're seeing the president continue to draw in his folks, and we're seeing a coalescing of the Republican coalitions, and it means that you could have these entirely opposite effects that are for exactly the same reason. And it's no mistake that President Trump started his final campaign stretch in Florida, a state he won, and he will be hitting 11 stops, all of them in very, very red or reddish parts of states that he carried 2 years ago.
It also happens to be, as you know, Rick, that only a third of the Senate is up for re-election every midterm cycle. And this time, that third of senators happen to be from really red states.
That's right. And you see the bounty of that now in the president pushing this advantage. And I think it's really striking to see him out there. The interview with John Karl, I think, shows a lot of it. The announcement he'll have later in the day on immigration, all of it fitting together to the president doing what he can to rev up his base, even if that it means at times stretching the truth quite a bit.
And Rick, before we let you go, I think you've always often had some sage wisdom on the amount of ambiguity and uncertainty in all the polling around this midterm election. As you know well, our friends at 538 say there's still, for example, a 15% chance that the Republicans could hold the House at the end of the day. How much of that uncertainty are you factoring in when you're looking at say, exit polls coming in on Tuesday?
We do not know what we do not know. And there are several big unknowns in this election. One of them is, do the Democrats change the makeup of a midterm electorate? Do they have younger, more diverse people out to vote? And people that normally don't vote in a midterm cycle, do they change that? Do they turn that on? And the second, what is the Trump effect? We saw it 2 years ago, the dramatic effect, what it means to have President Trump on the ballot. He has tried to get himself on the ballot, as he has pointed out. And I think the biggest watchword to end with the sentiment that we talked with Billy Ray and Mark Ruffalo a few minutes ago, go out and vote. It doesn't matter what the polls say. It doesn't matter what the prognosticators say. Nothing is done until the voters have their say, and there's still a couple of days left for that to happen.
Rick Klein, political director. We know you're following it all the way to the finish. Rick, thank you so much for sticking around and for your insight today. Finally, we are tracking one of the biggest issues this campaign, immigration. The president throwing a log on the fire, as Rick just said, an announcement coming later this afternoon. Also yesterday revealing he could send up to 15,000 active duty troops down to the border, many of them already deploying there. Fresh pictures coming in from the Pentagon. That's where our Pentagon reporter Louis Martinez has been standing by. Louis, thanks for sticking around. Bring us up to speed on the latest on the military deployment, and what reaction did you get over there yesterday when the president upped the ante again to potentially 15,000 troops?
No, you're right, Devin. I think the word would be surprise, because nobody was tracking that number here at the Pentagon. If anything, reporters had been told 5,200 would be going to the border over the next week or so. But then U.S. Northern Command upped that to 7,000. That's the new number. Now, beyond that, to 10,000 and 15,000 that the president was talking about, nobody's really certain where that came from. There have been some ideas that maybe he's incorporating the 2,100 of the National Guardsmen that have been there since April. You can't really tell. But either way, I mean, the president can decide that if he wants more troops, he can do that. And then I think U.S. Northern Command has shown that pretty much if they need to adjust those numbers, they can do so, like they did by upping it to 7,000.
At a cost of, by one estimate, $90 million. Those migrants still hundreds and hundreds of miles away, many of them poor, some of the most impoverished people. I don't know if we still have that graphic, but our troops are headed there, Louis. This is underway. What do you expect to see in the next few days?
Well, we're seeing these pictures of these troops getting on planes, arriving in the border states, namely Texas. What they're doing is they're primarily going to these large staging areas. These are major bases in these states, for example, in San Antonio, at Fort Bliss, which is right on the border in El Paso, and Corpus Christi, which is closer to Brownsville. Now, we know that Brownsville is a port of entry, right? And that's actually the closest port of entry for the first caravan, if it's to make its way to the U.S. Over the next couple of weeks. But what these forces are going to do before they ever head out to close to the border area, what they're going to do is they're going to undergo special training from Customs and Border Protection. They're going to get information about what it is they can do and what they can't do when they support them, because remember, that's the purpose of them being sent. They're there to support CBP in their duties. And so they want to make sure that everybody's trained on the rules of engagement, that they know what they're going to be doing. It could be maybe early next week before we actually see them on the border itself.
All right, Louis Martinez, we know you're tracking it all the way to the finish. Thank you so much for that insight and reporting and for sticking around. Packed show today. That's all for us here in the briefing room at ABC News. 5 days to go. Stick with us, ABC News Live, every step of the way through Tuesday. Special coverage coming up next Tuesday, 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time with the big vote, continuing through 2 a.m. Eastern Time on Wednesday. Mary Alice Parks, I'm Devin Dwyer in Washington. We'll see you next time.